And we now move to our Haftarah section, which is from 1 Samuel 20 18 to 42. And as you can see, that is a real photo of the real David and Jonathan from the real history. So today's Haftarah is read on a Shabbat that is immediately followed by Rosh Chodesh. Indeed, the reading opens with the words, Jonathan said, tomorrow is the first of the new month. The story is one of loyalty and devotion. David and Jonathan are dear friends, in inverted commas. Jonathan's father, King Saul, despises David, fearing that he will depose him from the throne. Sensing danger, Jonathan told David to hide in a field rather than attend Saul's Rosh Chodesh feast. Jonathan then attended the feast and gauged the king's mood. Realizing that Saul was determined to kill David, Jonathan went out to the field, shot 3 arrows, and called to his assistant, the arrow is beyond you, a predetermined signal to his friend that it was not safe to return to the king's palace. Before parting, the two friends kissed and wept and swore to maintain their mutual affection for generations to come. And to expand on that, we have Elliot, who is an American, Canadian, Israeli queer Jewish educator and activist whose work focuses on the intersection of Judaism and human rights. He is originally from Chicago. Elliot holds a BA from McGill University, an MA in Jewish education, and an MA in Jewish literature from the Jewish Theological Seminary. Since moving to Israel in 2011, Elliot has taught hundreds of groups from Israel and abroad and has volunteered and advocated for refugee rights, LGBTQ inclusion, and other causes. Elliot currently serves as a senior educator at Binah, the home of Israeli Judaism. Elliot is also a student in the Beit Midrash for Israeli Rabbis by Hamidrashah at Oranim and Hartman Institute, is an affiliate faculty member at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and a blogger at the Times of Israel. Elliot lives in Jaffa. So over to Elliot. Do you want me to share this? I think you can share your screen, by the way.
Great. Yeah, I'll share my screen shortly. First of all, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you all for having me here. It's so nice to be here in this community. How much time do we have for this study?
Um, how much time do you need?
I'll take as much as you'll give me.
You can have an hour if you want.
Great. Perfect.
Okay.
So much Torah, so little time. Um, So, indeed, this is a Shabbat Machar Chodesh, which is a very minor thing on the Jewish calendar. Most people miss it. It's just this special Haftarah that you say when Shabbat falls on Erev Rosh Chodesh. And it's often trumped by other special holidays or events or other special Haftarot. And very often synagogues actually miss it because they forget that it's like the next day is Rosh Chodesh and they forget to read the special Haftarah. And the only real, historical reference to it is it says in the Talmud that, okay, when Shabbat falls on Erev Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to read this chunk that starts with, and Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, tomorrow is the new moon. And all kinds of different symbolic and spiritual interpretations can be made as to like what the significance is of it besides the the timing of it with the calendar and the new moon. I would like to argue there's all kinds of place for new interpretation for spiritual interpretations of this, but maybe we'll read the text itself as well as some context. Um, and then you can decide why you think or what you think the significance of this date might be on the calendar for you. Um, so I'll say a little bit about the significance of the story for me, the story of David and Jonathan for me. Um, so I first discovered the story of David and Jonathan when I was in high school in Chicago, and I went to uh, public state school, like non-Jewish school during the week. And on Sunday mornings, I got my supplemental Jewish education at an Orthodox Jewish program. Heaven forfend, as they say. Um, and we were studying Bible in Bible class. We were studying the book of Samuel. and we're studying the various King David stories. David defeats Goliath, and then we came upon the story of David and Jonathan. Suddenly, my attention was piqued. I should note at the time that I was a very, very closeted gay teenager, um, and caught between, a traditional Jewish world and the broader secular world around me. And came upon the story, and suddenly my attention was piqued. Oh, very nice, thank you. I have my own little PowerPoint that I will share shortly, but I like this image. It's like a Disney. Anyway, um, oh, Disney really should make a David and Jonathan movie. Anyway, focus, Elliot, focus. Um, I was like, what is going on here in this story with David and Jonathan? I didn't dare ask anything because I was too closeted to say anything. Another student in the class asked the rabbi, Rabbi, weren't they gay? And the rabbi, I remember, got so uncomfortable. This is like, I don't know, late 1990s. Big beard, big black hat, the whole thing. And he said, no, we know that they couldn't be that because we know that God doesn't like that. And anybody who says that doesn't understand the Torah and doesn't know about God and doesn't know what they're talking about. He couldn't even say homosexuality, or he couldn't say it. But he would just, no, didn't know. Hard, no. Okay, fine. That was the rabbi's answer. Um, and um, and then I went home and I did what, teenage boys do. I locked the door, and when I was sure nobody else was around, I took the Bible off the shelf and I opened up the Bible and I continued reading the rest of the David and Jonathan story. Seriously, I did this secretly because I didn't want anybody to know I was reading David and Jonathan, lest they should ask questions. Um, and I read the whole story. And I was like, oh, they were totally gay. Or at least Jonathan was gay, maybe David was, but I was convinced. This like 15-year-old closeted, confused teenager. I had like didn't have a lot of clarity in a lot of things in life, but to me this was clear. And I had my own conversation with God at the time, and God, I was like, I don't know much. I'm just like this 15-year-old kid. I'm not a rabbi. Everybody says that God hates gays, but like you got this story in the Bible. I feel like you're trying to tell me something. I'm gonna live my life, and I think you'll understand. Um, and eventually that led to a process of me coming to accept myself and coming out of the closet, and then also getting connected to other approaches to Judaism besides Orthodoxy, and other approaches to the Bible, but critical approaches and humanistic approaches to reading the Bible. Um, and then I got to explore, um, go back to the story of David and Jonathan. People talk about feminist readings of the Bible and source critical readings of the Bible, and there's been this growing movement of queer readings of the Bible. What I like to do is, well, I like to do a queer reading of David and Jonathan, but I also like to be, a pluralistic educator. We're going to read the story, and you can decide for yourselves. Okay, I don't want to force any reading at anyone. There's a lot of what I like to call textual ambiguity. Yes, there are going to be a lot of textual puns in this session. Get used to it or enjoy them. Um, and we're going to dive in and we're going to look at the story. The heart of the story is the Haftarah, but we're going to look at a little bit what comes before and what comes after. Um, um, oh, Rafi, I love your image there, interpreting the nexus of our narratives. Very nice. Okay. Before we dive into the story, any questions, comments, arguments, related jokes? Okay. Innuendo. Okay. Let me see if I can share my screen now. All right, so I like to call this David and Jonathan, the textually explicit version. This is my first time actually giving this talk on a Machar Chodesh, so it's kind of a spiritual experiment. Careful, I'm going to remove the censored. They're holding hands. Okay. The first encounter. This is a few chapters before our Haftarah. The setting is David has. All right, so King Saul is the first king of Israel. His oldest son is Jonathan. Presumably, Jonathan is going to be the next king, but it's unclear because Saul is the first king and he was anointed by the prophet Samuel. So what the future of the dynasty is going to be is unclear. Um, the Philistines and the Israelites are at war. There's this giant Philistine Goliath that everybody's afraid of. David goes and kills Goliath with his slingshot and then takes his head to Jerusalem, to the royal palace. And he's like, "Here, Saul, I killed Goliath." Um, and then immediately after that, this scene happens. So super romantic. Okay. Imagine David is like dripping in like blood and sweat from battle, holding like the head of Goliath, which is also dripping with like blood and who knows what, whatever what. Okay. And then this happens. When David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. Saul took him into his service that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan and David made a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the cloak and tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, bow, and belt. David, it's just me, it's getting a little warm in here. Okay, David went out with the troops, and he was successful in every mission on which Saul sent him. And Saul put him in command of all the soldiers. This pleased all the troops and Saul's courtiers as well. Comments, initial thoughts just on this passage, the first encounter? I mean, I would call it love at first sight. You know, Jonathan sees David, and as soon as David is done talking to his dad, he's like, I'm in love. Now, this could, of course, just be friendly love, filial love, brotherly love from one soldier to another. Oh, wow, I'm impressed with this guy as a soldier. I want to fight alongside him. Hurrah, so I'm going to take off all of my clothes and my sword and my bow and give it to him as a sign of my friendship in arms and my military love for him. Sure, we can go with that. Um, but I mean, the language here also, it says, "Ve'avehu kenafsho," he loved him as himself. We might be familiar with the commandment, "Ve'havta re'echa kamocha," love your fellow or love your neighbor as yourself. And here it seems to be that Jonathan is enacting that commandment of loving his fellow as much as he loves himself. Um, Okay, and there is a pact. They make a pact with each other. What exactly is that pact? It's a little bit unclear at that moment, but there's some kind of pact of love that is happening. Um, it is also noticeable that it does seem to be that this love seems to be a little bit imbalanced, or by a little bit, I mean very. We know that Jonathan loves David. It doesn't say here that David loves Jonathan, though they do join each other in a pact. Does he also love him? Is he afraid to admit it? Or is he just perhaps um, making use of the fact that Jonathan is Saul's son, and that's going to be useful for him? Because we know that David does not hesitate to make use of people who could be useful for him. Okay. Um, Warning, it's not a perfect love story. All right, things get heated. Right. This is the next chapter. So Saul um is like and also enamored by David. We could talk about that another day. But then he gets jealous of David. But then he's worried. He feels threatened by David because everybody loves David and David is a great hero. He's worried that David is going to become king and take away the kingship from him. So every so often, like Saul loves David, and David comes and like plays music for him, and then Saul wants to kill David, and he chases David away, and then David comes. Anyway, so there's a lot of this like back and forth. Here's just one chunk of it. Saul urged his son Jonathan and all his courtiers to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan was very fond of David. The Hebrew is chafetz b'David me'od. Chafetz means like to desire or want. Just saying. Um, and Jonathan told David, my father Saul is bent on killing you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Get to a secret place and remain in hiding. I will go out and stand next to my father in the field where you will be, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you. So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, let not your majesty wrong his servant David, for he has not wronged you. Indeed, all his actions have been very much to your advantage. He took his life in his hands and killed the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then should you incur the guilt of the shedding of the blood of an innocent man, killing David without cause? Saul heeded Jonathan's plea, and Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Jonathan called David, and Jonathan told him all this. Then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as before. All right, so he comes back into his home. By the way, I should point out when somebody enters another home, the classic example of when somebody enters another home is through marriage. When the woman traditionally enters the home of the family um, of the husband. So David has been sent away and then brought back into the home. I got some thumbs up from Martin, so all right, that's a good sign. Now we have a scene of shooting what I call arrows of love. Shooting what? Oh, arrows of love. Okay. This is now the scene that surrounds the Haftarah. Um, Wait, this is Samuel. I want to say for Samuel 21, not 20. No, it's 20. Okay, there we go. That Haftarah is going to start with the next chapter. It's also curious as to why the Haftarah starts with the next chapter and not this one. We could talk about that if you want. Okay, fast forward. By the way, I really encourage you to like read all of these chapters and everything that happens in between. I just took out, the sexy stuff. I mean the friendship stuff. Okay. Um, 1 Samuel chapter 20. David fled from Naioth in Ramah. He came to Jonathan and said, what have I done? What is my crime and my guilt against your father that he seeks my life? He replied, Jonathan replied, that is, heaven forbid you shall not die. My father does not do anything great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father conceal this matter to me? It cannot be. David swore further, your father knows well that you are fond of me and has decided Jonathan must not learn of this or he will be grieved. But as the Lord lives and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want, I will do it for you. Um, so essentially, David is like, why does Saul want to kill me? And Jonathan's like, don't worry. He's gonna let me know if he wants to kill you. And David's like, I don't know if Saul is gonna tell you because Saul knows that like you have a thing for me or that you like me. So he might not tell you. So Jonathan's like, you tell me what to do. Or whatever you want, I will do it. Okay. Um, Jonathan said, sorry, verse 5, David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new moon. Now, the Haftarah could have as easily started here, but it didn't. The Hebrew is Vayomer David el Yehonatan, Hine Chodesh Machal. Chodesh means like the Chadash, the new moon. Okay. Because in the Hebrew calendar, the new moon is the start of the new month. And okay. We can also talk about like the moon and the month as like a feminine symbol and alignment with Machzor Nashim, um, the female cycle, the feminine monthly cycle. But I digress. David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new, oh, sorry. And also in the Jewish tradition, the new moon, Rosh Chodesh, is a woman's festival. Okay. Uh, Close parentheses. David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new moon, and I am to sit with the king at the meal. Instead, let me go, and I will hide in the countryside until the third evening. If your father notes my absence, you say, David asked my permission to run down to its hometown, Bethlehem, for the whole family has its annual sacrifice there. If he says, good, your servant is safe. But if his anger flares up, know that he is resolved to do me harm. Deal faithfully faithfully with your servant, since you have taken your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. And if I am guilty, kill me yourself, but don't make me go back to your father. So David comes up with this scheme. He's like, all right, we're going to do this subtly. There's supposed to be the Rosh Chodesh, the new moon feast. I'm just not going to show up. But like when when Saul asks where I am, tell him I went to my family for an annual sacrifice, and then see how he reacts to that. And then based on his reaction, we'll know. And if he wants to kill me, just kill me yourself, because I can't bear to be seen by your father. Okay. Um, Jonathan replied, don't talk like that. If I learn that my father has resolved to kill you, I will surely tell you about it. David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Well, how am I going to find out? If your father answers me harshly, like, how are you going to let me know? Like, he's going to be. Jonathan said to David, let us go into the field. And they both went out into the field. I'm just going to leave that there. What did they do in the field? They talked, I guess. Um, but I have to admit, it's a little bit weird. It says they went onto the field. Why is that necessary? And then, okay, fine. Then Jonathan said to David, by the Lord, all right, he's going to come up with a solution for this problem of how they're going to communicate. He seems to have a moment of euphoria. I mean, epiphany. That's the word I'm looking for. In the field. Then David said to Jonathan, by the Lord, the God of Israel. They're swearing in the name of God. They're invoking God's name in their love. It's really, anyway, divine. By the Lord, the God of Israel, I will sound out my father at this time tomorrow, or on the third day. And if his response is favorable for David, I will send a message to you at once and disclose it to you. But if my father intends to do you harm, may the Lord do thus to Jonathan and more. He's speaking about himself in the third person because he's like swearing. May the Lord do thus to Jonathan and more if I do not disclose to you and send you off to escape unharmed. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father. Nor shall you fail to show me the Lord's faithfulness while I am alive, nor when I am dead. Shall you ever discontinue your faithfulness to my house, not even after the Lord has wiped out every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth? Thus is Jonathan covenanted with the house of David, and may the Lord requite the enemies of David. Jonathan, out of his love for David, adjured him again, for he loved him as himself. Right, so adjured, the Hebrew is hispia, lahashbia, vayosef lahashbia, which means to adjure, to cause someone to swear or to make someone swear. In other words, Jonathan, like, I swear, but I need you to swear. So he made David swear. There's some actually different like versions, like I think in the Septuagint, it reads like Jonathan swore rather than adjured, but I think adjured actually makes more sense here. But let's keep going. Here we go. This is where a Haftarah begins. Y'all ready for this? Jonathan said to him, tomorrow will be the new moon, and you will be missed when your seat remains vacant. So the day after tomorrow, go down all the way to the place where you hid the other time and stay close to the Etzel stone. By the way, there's a kind of secret tradition of where the stone is in Jerusalem. If anybody wants to know, talk to me after. Now I will shoot 3 arrows to one side of it, as though I were shooting at a mark. And I will order the boy to go and find the arrows. If I call to the boy, hey, the arrows are on this side of you, be reassured and come, for you are safe and there is no danger as the Lord lives. But if instead I call to the lad, hey, the arrows are beyond you, then leave, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the promise we made to each other, may the Lord be witness between you and me forever. Right, so they concocted this whole plan, that this code that he's going to go out shooting arrows, and if he says to like his lad servant, the arrows are here, like closer, that means okay, it's safe, David, you can come. If I say the arrows are beyond, that's code for like David, you better run. So they don't actually have to meet in order to communicate this. Okay, sneaky, sneaky. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Jonathan rose and Abner sat down at Saul's side, but David's place remained vacant. That day, however, Saul said nothing. It's accidental, he thought. He must be unclean and not yet cleansed, because I guess you can't sit at a ritual meal if, you're unclean, impure ritually for whatever reason. But on the day after the new moon, or the second day of the new moon festival, like just we still have some Rosh Chodesh festivals on one day or 2 days still in the Jewish tradition. But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was vacant again. So Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why didn't the son of Jesse, i.e., David, come to the meal yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David begged leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our town, and my brother has summoned me to it. Do me a favor, let me slip away to see my kinsman.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." And how does Saul respond? Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan. "You perverse son of you son of a perverse rebellious woman!" he shouted. "I know that you side with the son of Jesse, to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death." But Jonathan spoke up and said to his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" At that, Saul threw his spear at him to strike him down, and Jonathan realized that his father was determined to do away with David. Jonathan rose from the table in a rage. He ate no food on the second day of the new moon because he was grieved about David and because his father had humiliated him. This scene is this is like, I don't know the words. It's dramatic. We know that like Saul has gone crazy before and like thrown a spear at David. This is the first time he throws a spear at his own son. Um, and I mean, there's some truth to what Saul is saying. That like it seems like David is very likely to take the throne. And if David takes the throne, that means Jonathan isn't going to be king. But it seems to be that Jonathan doesn't seem to care about that. He cares more about David and David's life than he does about his own kingship or status. Um, Also, it's really interesting the language here that Saul uses against Jonathan is super sexual. It's like you do this to the defamement of your mother and your mother's nakedness. It's like this is like the language of incest. And it's like the shame of your mother. Like, what does it have to do with his mother and his mother's nakedness that he has a military friendship with um Jonathan? I mean, with David. I think this is like possibly one of the first instances of gay bashing in the Bible. Where Saul has like some feelings for David, but then he like doesn't, and then he does, then he does. He's like struggling with his own feelings, and he like is kind of okay with his son's friendship plus with um David, but then he isn't. But at this point, he just like lets it all out. He's like, "You son of a whore. Like, I know what you're up to. This is no good." And he throws his spear at him. Um, but you can interpret it as you will. Okay. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the open or into the field for the meeting with David, accompanied by a young boy or young lad, servant assistant. Okay. He said to the boy, "Run ahead and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot the arrows past him. When the boy came out to the place where the arrows shot by Jonathan had fallen, Jonathan called out to the boy, "Hey, the arrows are beyond you." So that's code for David, you better run. But wait, there's more. And Jonathan called after the boy, "Quick, hurry up, don't stop." So Jonathan's boy gathered the arrows and came back to his master. The boy suspected nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan handed the gear to his boy and told him, "Take these back to the town." When the boy got there, David emerged from his concealment at the Negev, or in the southern part, depending on the translation. He flung himself face down on the ground and bowed low 3 times. Now, interesting, who's supposed to be bowing to whom, right? Jonathan is bowing to David. David should be bowing to Jonathan, and Jonathan is the son of the king. Okay. They kissed each other and wept together. Uh, David wept the longer. The Hebrew is Ad David Higdil. There's some textual ambiguity here. It means until David enlarged or increased. Um, so it could be interpreted as until he wept more. But there is some interpretations, not just modern queer interpretation. There's some medieval interpretations says Higdil is in terms of sexual. Um, David had an erection, for lack of softer language. Harder language? Okay, Elliot, keep it. I'm not going to say PG, I'll say R. Okay, anyway. Um, Where were we? They kissed each other and wept together. David wept the longer. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we two have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord. May the Lord be witness between you and me, and between your offspring and mine forever." Now, I don't like that translation. The Hebrew is Beini uvencha uven zar'i. This, by the way, this is the new JPS translation, which is one of the better Bible translations. And the Hebrew is Beini uvencha uven zar'i uven zar'acha ad olam. Literally between my seed and your seed forever. The word zera could mean like seed or semen. It could also mean offspring, or literally the seed that you plant. Um, so it could be like we are making, we have made this like multi-generational pact. Um, but it's almost like this merging of like families, like your family. This pact isn't just between me and you, it's between our families and our future families. It's almost like a sort of marriage contract without it being a marriage. Okay. And you might think that's the end of our Haftarah. You might think this would be the last time they meet. They do meet once more. A few chapters later, for Samuel 23, David was staying in the strongholds of the wilderness of Judah. He stayed in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul searched for him constantly, but God did not deliver him into his hands. David was once at Horesh in the wilderness of Ziph when David learned that Saul had come out to seek his life. And Saul's son Jonathan came to David at Horesh and encouraged him in the name of God. He said to him, "Do not be afraid. The hand of my father Saul will never touch you. You are going to be king over Israel, and I shall be second to you. And even my father Saul knows this too." And the two of them entered into a pact before the Lord. David remained in Horesh, and Jonathan went home. This is the last time the two of them meet, at least that we know about in the story. But I do think it's interesting, Jonathan's vision or dream, whatever you might call it, or encouragement is that David's going to be king, and Jonathan's like, "I'm going to be your second." Militarily, of course, not like your queen or something. Spoiler alert, this vision doesn't exactly become true. Um, Saul and Jonathan die in battle. So Second Samuel opens with the death, or David finding out of the death of Saul and Jonathan, and then David laments. David's Kinat David, David's eulogy um, over the death of Saul and Jonathan. And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son, and said, "To teach the sons of Judah the bow, behold, it is written in the book of Jashar, Thy beauty, O Israel, upon thy high places is slain. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Let the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, neither fields of choice fruits. For there the shield of the mighty was vilely cast away, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back. The phrase here in the Hebrew is keshet, Yehonatan. The Hebrew word keshet can mean bow, like bow and arrow. It can also be a bow, like a rainbow, is also keshet. Just pointing that out. The bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, the lovely and the pleasant, in their lives, even in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How mighty how are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan upon the high places is slain. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant thou hast been unto me. Wonderful was thy love to me, passing or surpassing the love of women. The Hebrew is צר לי עליך אחי יהונתן, נעמת לי מאוד, נפלטה אהבתך לי מאהבת נשים. How the mighty fallen, the weapons of war perished. That, in theory, is the end of the story of David and Jonathan. There is some continuity. Specifically, David has killed all of Saul's offspring except for Jonathan's son. And David takes Jonathan's son under his wing. It's important to note that David does get married and has several wives. Jonathan also gets married and has a son. David had several sons through several wives. One of his wives, by the way, that he marries in the chapters, in between the chapters that we read, is Saul's daughter, Michal, Jonathan's sister. There's a really fun parody sketch from the Israeli show Ayudim Ba'im. The Jews are coming, about that kind of love triangle. We can look at that later if you want. Okay, I have some more what I call intertextual references, some ancient and modern commentaries or midrashim, kind of plays on the David and Jonathan story. But I just want to pause here now that we looked at the story, the text itself. I'm a very text obsessed teacher. Everything's all about text. All I think about is text. And the story is very texty, I should say. I'm going to pause here. Questions, comments. I'm also curious, what do you think? Just from reading the story, of course, with my completely objective tone, what do you think of the relationship between David and Jonathan? Just, black and white in the text. Really good friends? Were they lovers? Was there unrequited physical attraction? What do you think? Or, yeah.
I was just wondering as to if you are aware of different historical interpretations during the centuries of their relationship.
So I'm not aware of any preserved ancient interpretations like medieval midrashim that say there was, a sexual relationship between them. I'm aware of at least one midrash, and I can point it out, or interpretation that talks about, okay, it looks like David had an erection when he was hugging Jonathan. Um, but besides that, I haven't come across any, say, Jewish or Christian or other, until modern times, interpretation saying they were lovers explicitly. There are some, I think, rabbinic interpretations that I think are also ambiguous in terms of their interpretation of David and Jonathan. We can also look at them, but none that are explicitly bringing that up. Yeah, Martin.
So I spoke to my mother about this. I said that we were going to have this service and that I'd heard your talk in another form before. And she said, I grew up always being told that it was brotherly love, um, which I think most people have been told. And I think that it's fair that that is one interpretation. However, when I asked my mum, would you write poetry about your sister and refer to her in the ways that David and Jonathan refer to each other? Um, would you say to your sister, I love you, my love for you surpasses that of my husband? And she said, well, no, because when you use that wording, it makes it sound like I love you more than my husband, or the love that I have for you is somehow, I mean, you wouldn't say that the love that I have for you is um, stronger or surpasses that. You would express it a different way if you meant that it was just brotherly love or sisterly love.
Yeah. But it
Yeah.
is, yes, it is also important to note it's David isn't talking about his love for Jonathan. In
Mm.
that poem, he's still talking about Jonathan's love for him.
For
Your
him.
love
Mm.
was so
Mm.
wonderful for me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. Um, David doesn't really talk about so much about who he loves, but people clearly love David. But at least in this case, it's a little bit like Brokeback Mountain-y. Um, I think the Bible was definitely influenced by Brokeback Mountain. We can talk about that another day. But it's kind of like this tragic love story where it's all about intertextuality, where where David kind of realizes too late or appreciates too late Jonathan's love for him. But that language is more than we would expect from a brotherly love. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Paula and Betty Ann.
Oh, I was going to say, I wonder,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I wonder if there's any other place in the Bible where anything like this occurs that you might compare it to as, well, yeah, lots of people had this kind of relationship or whatever. And how does this compare? Or is this really stand out as unique, which would be, I think, provocative in that way.
Well, so in the Bible, it stands out as unique. First of all, in terms of any relationship where the word love is used so much. Um, wait, hang on. Rendell Mars on Mars is posted a comment that I want to read. We have a few examples of friendships between the same gender in the Bible. This is a friendship that is deep and loyal, but could be interpreted in other ways. Just as Jewish people search for Jewishness and everything, gay people look for gay connections and everything. So true. But I think maybe straight people look for straight things and everything. Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to be facetious. It's, yeah. This friendship is described in some detail in terms of events overall in several Bible chapters. It is good to question and interpret. So, yeah, in terms of the use of the word love, like I'm not aware of any other friendship or any relationship, even like a relationship between a man and woman, where the word love is used so much, even though it's mostly one-sided. Think I will say in terms of Near Eastern literature, there is a classic archetype of the male lover of the warrior hero, um, like Achilles for example, and others. That, oh, this person was so manly, was so strong, was so beautiful. He was loved by both men and women. Um, yeah, thanks for pointing out, Martin. There's a number of like homoerotic, Ibn Gabriel and other from Spain Hebrew poetry. But I'm not aware of anything else like this specifically in the Bible. I think the story of Ruth and Naomi is also interesting. I think um, I think it also is open to interpretation what the nature of their relationship was. I think a lot of women, a lot of lesbian women, actually, just like I as a gay man, find a lot of beauty and comfort in like seeing myself and my love in the story of David and Jonathan. I think a lot of lesbian women find a lot of comfort and joy in seeing themselves and the characters in Ruth and Naomi. I think that relationship is open to interpretation, but they definitely talk Ruth Davkaba. Ruth sticks to Naomi, just like a man stick like in Genesis, man sticks to his wife. Um, so there's, but it's not nearly, I think there isn't as, it's much shorter. There isn't as much kind of like sexual language as there is in David and Jonathan, but we can talk about the difference between David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, but I think Ruth and Naomi is definitely an example of two individuals forming a familial unit that goes against what is expected of them by society. And I think here we see also David and Jonathan creating a pack that goes against what is expected of them. We would expect Jonathan to look out for his own family or look out for his father or look out for his own power and his own ass. Well, hold that thought. Um, and instead of David's life, but we see him sacrificing his own, you know, as his own fame, fortune, kingship for David. So I'll say a few things about this. Wait, Naomi has to, I wanted to say something, but in this context, I wanted to say, um, I think that the text of David and Jonathan, just like Ruth and Naomi, but the text of David and Jonathan, it is textually ambiguous. I know I love saying that. I'll say that again. Sexually and textually ambiguous. It does not say, and David lied with Jonathan as one lies with a woman, or and David knew Jonathan, or like, it doesn't say that. It also doesn't say, but they were just friends, right? Um, there was nothing sexual about. There's a lot of sexual language. There's a lot of innuendo. I think it could go either way. I mean, I honestly think David does swing both ways. I think Jonathan's a little more one way. And maybe I'll say a little bit more later why what I think about that ambiguity. And the power of the different ways of interpreting it. Naomi, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I've been teaching this text for many years, and I used to always, I'm not gay, but I used to always snigger at the Higdeal for many, many years. I mean, I picked up on that many, many years ago.
Nice.
But that's one thing. The other thing I think that's really very interesting is that I think Saul also was in love with David, and there might be jealousy on Saul's part. In other words, I think that's very much evident to the text because he's throwing daggers and whatever at both of them. And the other thing is that this was picked up beautifully. There's a wonderful satiric series called Hayehudim Ba'im, the Jews are coming, and this was picked up beautifully in a threesome. Michal,
Yeah.
Jonathan, and
Saul.
all are
Yeah.
all clearly in love. It's done as a comedy, but there's a lot of,
I
it's very thought provoking.
I have
So
that
I think
clip in
that
my
there's
PowerPoint. I can also share that with you all. Yeah, yeah.
okay, maybe you should because really I don't know if there are what do you call it, subtitles,
Subtitles.
but they picked
I
up on it, and I think it's there's a lot to that, to Saul's instability. And if you notice, there's never any mention of Saul's wife there. In other words, it's always his relationship either to his children or to David. No relationship with him to his wife. They are mentioned later, but not in this context at all.
yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that could just be part of like the general like kind of misogyny of like a lot of these Bible stories that women are just secondary or tertiary. But it's interesting that like well, Michal and Bathsheba and Abigail, there are a number of women in the David stories that take initiative and are actually central characters. But no, but it is interesting, like how, and specifically in the David and Jonathan relationship, like there's a lot of masculinity there. Um, okay, maybe I'll say a few more things and then we'll look at some of the other texts that I brought in. So I want to say something about the ambiguity. Um, so I really think this story could go either way, or many ways. I think you can interpret this story as they were just friends. And I think I hear that actually from a number of people that I know who are like Israeli men who have like served in the army. And they say like you don't know what it's like when you like serve in the army with someone and you're like ready to die for it. It's like a special kind of love and fidelity that you have to one another. I think it's super powerful. At the same time, we don't really see David and Jonathan actually fighting alongside one another. So, okay, but they're still both soldiers? Okay. But either way, but even if that is the interpretation, there's something powerful and beautiful, again, about, first of all, two men expressing their love, or at least one man, who is a very significant public position, publicly expressing his love to another man, and choosing another man because of how much he cares about him over his own status. Okay, so even if one doesn't take like a homosexual interpretation, I think we could take a queer interpretation of this in terms of challenging norms of power in society. The other end of the spectrum is they were lovers and they essentially made a sort of marriage pact between them. Another interpretation is they were kind of, what's it called, unfulfilled lovers. They like loved each other, but that love was never fulfilled. And so they made this pact between them and between their children, kind of in lieu of being able to actually consummate their love with each other. If any of you have seen the Dybbuk, which some would argue is a lot of queer interpretations, it's like this classic Yiddish play in the first, what's it called, talkie movie with anyway, really interesting history about the movie and the play The Dybbuk, and by Ansky, and then Leonard Bernstein. So anyway, the interpretations of it. Anyway, but the base is two men are like chavruta buddies, and they love each other so much, but they can't get married. So what do? They make a pact that if one has a son and one have a daughter, they'll get married. That's the beginning of that. Okay. A whole range of interpretations. I think for me personally, I can't not read it as a gay love story. I see myself in the text. And for me personally, it was so powerful. Like when I first read the David and Jonathan story in like 1990, whatever, I had never been exposed to a love story between two men before. The first time I was exposed to a love story between two men was in the Bible. And for me, that was so empowering. I don't even have the words to describe what this story still does for me. And I think that should be enough to let me interpret it that way. But I can't not interpret it that way. Like based on my own lived experience and what I see in the text, I can't not see it. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, you know? Just like the sexual language in the Aladdin songs. Anyway, that's another session. Like once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you want me to ruin Megillat Esther for you, that's also a lot of fun. Happy to do that another time. But anyway, but I think my theory is, and I don't really have any way of proving this, and I don't know, maybe one day I'll write a dissertation or something. So one of the classic theories, so we know the Ruth is a Moabite. Let's look at the book of Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite, and according to the book of Deuteronomy, you're not allowed to marry a Moabite up or let a Moabite enter the congregation of the Lord up into the 10th generation. Yet according to the book of Ruth, King David, same King David, is Ruth's great grandson. So technically, David isn't allowed to join the kingdom of Israel according to the book of Deuteronomy. But according to a common theory among many biblical scholars, is that the book of Ruth is actually a polemic that was written in protest against the prohibition of bringing in Moabites, or in general, the vibe, then the prohibitions and the movement against bringing in foreign wives that was prominent when the Jews returned from Babylon during Second Temple times. And we all know that law is powerful, but sometimes something that's more powerful than law is a good story, especially a good love story. Okay, it says so in Deuteronomy, but let me tell you a story. And it's the story of Ruth, the great grandmother of King David. And was she a righteous woman? Let me tell you what she did. And I feel like I wonder if the story of David and Jonathan might be in some ways a polemic against Leviticus 18:22, against Levitical prohibition well, what is usually interpreted as Levitical prohibition of homosexual relationship between men. Okay, so Leviticus says what Leviticus says, but let me tell you a story. It's the story of King David, our most manly king. And he had a lover. And let me tell you about that. And their love was like no other. Um, and that the story was written possibly as like kind of a pushback, another voice against either what was written in Leviticus or against, people who felt otherwise about homosexual relations back in the day. But the story was written or edited in such a way that it was textually ambiguous. So it's possible that it was more explicit and it was edited. It's also possible that it was always written this way so that for generations and generations, little queer kids would read the story and they'd be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I see something that nobody else sees. And I think that that is also connected to Machar Chodesh. What is Machar Chodesh? It's like the day before the new moon, kind of in between the old moon and the new moon, in between the two moons, the moon is hidden. And David is hiding, and John, there's so much hiddenness. And there's some hiddenness in the story. And I think like the full meaning of the story, the full love is like hidden. And even Rashi and others talk about like the kingdom of David like a moon that waxes and wanes. Sometimes it's hidden and sometimes it glows brightly. And I think that's the story with like queer love. And I think love, any kind of love that kind of struggles to find its way, forbidden love. Sometimes it has to be hidden and sometimes it's able to shine its brightest. Um, and there's something very special about the light of the moon. Um, so, um, well, maybe I will actually, yeah, I will end here by saying at least, um, I think there's something really powerful about these stories. I mean, I believe all of these stories were written by our ancestors for various reasons, trying to tell us various things. And I think it's really cool that our tradition has preserved these different stories. But I think for, thousands of years, certain people have had the authority to interpret and publish their interpretations of these stories. And now I think it's time for us to interpret these stories and add our own stories to the tradition in our own ways. Because I think, a law in black and white on paper can say one thing, but we all know there's nothing as powerful as a human story to bring about change, whether that's internal change or societal change. So this Shabbat Machar Chodesh, I guess my prayer for us is maybe able to find the strength and the creativity in our stories and in other stories to shine light on love, even in the darkest places. Um, Other thoughts, questions? Maybe I'll share here my PowerPoint presentation with other intertextual references and the sketch also that Naomi had mentioned, so people can look it up.
Thank you, Elliot. I wanted to just point out that there are kind of normativities that, as well as being heteronormativity, there are also other forms of normativities within the LGBT communities themselves, and there are people who have same-sex romance, and it's not necessarily expressed sexually, or maybe in a different way. And so I think people can also see themselves in this story regardless of whether it's sexual or not. It's certainly romantic love, in my opinion. Um, do we have any other comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you for that. It was really amazing, as always. So we're going to move to Kiddush. So if you have wine or whatever it is that you want to use for Kiddush, and also whatever bread you use, please go and get that now. Would somebody who can read the English, would somebody like to read the English and somebody else the Hebrew? Somebody who's comfortable with the Hebrew? Or maybe Elliot, you could read the Hebrew.
Sure, I would love to.
And we, humanity, keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant. For 6 days they worked, and on the seventh day they rested and were refreshed. Therefore, let us bless the Sabbath day and sanctify it. Blessed is the light and life, and blessed is the fruit of the vine to life.
ושומרים בני האדם את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשו מלאכה, וביום השביעי שבתו וינפשו. על כן נברך את יום השבת ונקדשהו. ברוך האור בחיים וברוך פרי הגפן, לחיים.
Chaim. Could you both do the same for the motzi?
If we can eat and drink together, we can live and love together. So let us bless those that bring forth bread from the earth.
אם נוכל לאכול ולשתות יחדיו, נוכל לחיות ולאהוב יחדיו. לכן נברך את המוציאים לחם מן הארץ.
Amen. May this Shabbat bring you its light, joy, and peace. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
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 Shalom.